Digital 410 Productions proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts Dodd Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Henry Sledge.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast. And as always, we want to thank each and every one of you for your continued support, and thank you for hanging out with us on another Monday. Joining us, as always, is the always loyal, always there, Henry Sledge. Henry, how you doing, sir?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you guys?
I'm well. And joining us once again, I think he may, now that Jeff is an official member of the show, I think Mr. Jared Fredrick, historian and author, World War II historian, living historian. I think, sir, you may take the title for the most reoccurring guest on the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. I think that may be your title to take now, sir. This is what.
All right, what an honor.
Fourth?
I'm pleased.
I know you've been on more than three, so this has got to be your fourth or fifth appearance.
I think it's my fourth.
If I had a producer, I'd have him go back in the archives, but nay, it's just me and my dog. And, well, we ain't got that sort of time. But thank you once again for joining us. Now, before we get started, I just had a thought, Henry, with the little intro I just did. Oh, and by the way, for those of you, Jeff is not with us this week because he is traveling the world via a dually with... Leave this up to a retired Army personnel who is driving his family from Texas to New Jersey to get an inverter and a Mr. Coffee so he can brew his coffee live while driving down the interstate without stopping. He has equipped his truck with a Mr. Coffee percolator that sits so promptly on his console so he does not have to bother himself with gas station coffee or the like. But Jeff will probably be back with us next week. He may even be joining us remotely, but he is on his way to New Jersey, or is currently in New Jersey, somewhere throughout the world. But, with our little intro, Henry, if you don't mind me saying this, and I think it was even featured in the Pacific, and you and I jokingly, we sometimes would finish our text messages this way, but it's more of a sign of decorum and the way things used to be. And that was the way that your father would sign his letters, even to you and your brother and your family members. And just for the enjoyment of our audience, could you relay the way that your father would sign his letters to his correspondents?
Yeah, and you are correct. They did portray this in the first episode of the Pacific. But when my dad would leave me a note, like, hey, make sure you do this, make sure you take care of this, whatever, he would sign it YHAOS. And that stood for your humble and obedient servant, Dad.
Can we please return to a time where even when we're asking our kid to bend over and press the power button on the Roomba, because, well, that's all they have to do when we ask them to vacuum the house now, right? Your honorable, humble servant, Dad. Can we get back to can we reintroduce some decorum into society? I know Jared agrees with us on this fact. We need chivalry. We need chivalry. We need decorum. We need overall respect to our fellow persons, unless they... See, that's the thing. It's weird. We've gone from a society where people is given respect until they show that they don't deserve it, to now, I don't like you, I don't want to know you. You have to earn even the most little bit of my time because, well, the world revolves around me. I think it'd be great if we just revert back just a little bit. I think society would go a long way if just bring back a little decorum. So, but yeah.
That would be nice, Don.
Memories. Anyhow, Jared, how have you been, friend? You've been busy.
I have been staying busy as always, but productive busy, good busy. Doing a lot of education and outreach through the various ways that I can, and trying to spread the history gospel just like you good gentlemen.
Have you made the transition to full-time author yet? I mean, you got to be almost there, because the last time we had you on, you were promoting your book that you partnered up on, which was the fantastic book, and I believe Henry read it as well, about Mr. Dick Winters, and more importantly about the letters he wrote and the relationships he maintained. After I read that book, after having you on, we spoke so highly of that book. It's just, that is almost like next to the book you're promoting now, but as far as Easy Company goes, that is the book to have if you consider yourself an Easy Company, fanatic, because it so well rounds off that storyline. And then this book that you're putting out now, and I'll let you promote it here in a second, is kind of like even a step further for just the airborne in general and 101st of that time period. You've got to be so, I mean, you're just rolling from one book to another, right? I mean, the research involved in these books are just crazy.
Well, I've never been one to be bored. And you can ask my parents about this. But as soon as I was in 5th grade, I knew I wanted to be a historian. And so I've been on the move since I was a teenager. And I really enjoy sharing stories with people. And at first, when I was thinking of co-authoring these various Band of Brothers themed books, an initial thought that went through my mind is what else could be written about these guys that hasn't already been written? And it was very intimidating writing books about Dick Winters and about Ronald Spears, these iconic officers of the 101st Airborne Division. But as I began to research a lot of this with my co-author, Eric Dorr, we realized that some other books and the films, they really only scratched the surface, because even in a 10-hour series, you can't convey a whole person's life in all of their complexities. Things are going to be condensed. Things are going to be abridged. And especially in regard to Ronald Spears, he was just a closed door mystery.
He was more like
many people wanted to know about. And so once we started diving into the primary sources, we realized that there were additional stories to tell and that people were eager to hear about them. And so those were the foundations for these 2 books back to back, which I like to think of as companion pieces to an extent.
Oh, absolutely. And with the subject matters of Ronald Spears, which, by the way, the book is, in fact, Fierce Valor, the true story of Ronald Spears and his band of brothers. When it comes to Ronald Spears, and obviously with the miniseries HBO, they did it to leave a little suspense in the character development, but also because of the way Stephen Ambrose's book was done. There's very little known about, when people talk about Ronald Spears, what they know about the book and maybe, okay, he's a guy who may have potentially done this sort of what some could consider a war atrocity, and he's a guy who ran through enemy fire to jump over over a wall to get in contact with a platoon that was sent out on a wild goose chase by a scared and incompetent platoon leader. That's pretty much all we know about Ronald Spears, from the movie, other than he was super brave and outstanding. I'm sure you came across a lot of content that really surprised you and probably helped you define him more as a real person and not this mythical character that we know from Band of Brothers.
One of the great challenges as we were embarking on this endeavor is that we had to start off by peeling away the layers of myth. And to an extent, I think that's a good beginning for readers. Cast him in the perception as how people know him. And then as the journey continues, try to introduce the real man. And so just to give you a little bit of insight on the methodology that we used amidst our research, I'll preface all of that by saying that we wrote this during the pandemic when nothing was open.
What a perfect time.
When we couldn't go anywhere to do research. And so we relied very heavily on a cadre of fellow historians and Spears family members who were gracious enough and generous enough to share their various bits of information with us as we were moving along. On top of that, too, my co-author has a very substantial collection of Easy Company artifacts and also textual documents at the museum that he curates, and that's the Gettysburg Museum of History. And a core element of a lot of this material is the written correspondence that Dick Winters had with Ronald Spears over subsequent decades. And these letters were a gold mine that clarified, that corrected, that offered additional insight and context. And those letters were the true beginning of the conversation. Thereafter, we tried to bring some of these disparate conversations into chat with one another, if you will. This person said this person said that. Who was really there? Who was actually in Spears's platoon at this given moment? Sure. And so these are the sorts of scenarios that we offer readers. And as we were moving throughout the text and writing it, one thing that we were very mindful of was a sense of balance, because we did not want to portray him, one, as a war criminal or as a villain, which some people say he is, nor did we want to participate in just blind hero worship or hagiography as well. And so we really tried to find a middle ground that shows the nuance, the moral gray area that individuals have to confront in wartime. And certainly Ronald Spears was no exception to that sort of dynamic. And so that's a little bit of the background about the information we had and how we set out to craft this narrative.
Three things I want to pause on real quick before we advance. You were talking about, we did this during a pandemic. And my first thought was, great, perfect idea, perfect time to write a book when nothing's open. Then I thought, crap, how do you research a historical book when nothing's open, especially government entities? I mean, luckily, Eric has access to a museum, so that was open to him. But as far as you go in your normal research policies, you had to, as you said, reach out to other living historians who had access to some stuff, because it's not like you could go down the old National Archives. They're all boarded up. So compared to the research you've done for other books, that in and of itself has probably made it a little more tricky on that side, right?
Absolutely. We lucked out, though, because either myself, Eric, or some of our friends and colleagues, they had already obtained a lot of regimental and company records from the National Archives or from other federal libraries, things such as after-action reports, morning reports. I made ample use of Ancestry.com, newspapers.com, and there's so much out there that's digitized now.
Yeah.
And museums and libraries really tried to expedite and accelerate this process of digitization during the pandemic, knowing very well that their doors might not be open for a long time. And so the world was adjusting, and we historians were adjusting right along with it.
The other thing I wanted to ask you, because we know, when you did the book on Dick Winters, a lot of that came from personal material, letters that was actually donated to Eric and his museum. Was it, when you guys were going through the letters and trying to figure out what your research material was going to be or what the basis of the book was it at that point when you came across some of these personal letters to Spears that you said, okay, maybe this might turn into something? Was that the opening door, or was this something that came along later?
I was very hesitant at first to embark on writing a biography about Ronald Spears, because initially I was worried that there wasn't going to be enough material to work with.
Paint yourself into a corner.
These Spears Winters letters, they're fascinating, they're revealing, but is there enough? But luckily, through a lot of other literature, through things that the family was able to provide, I like to think that we pulled it off. And I think that my co-author and I, hopefully, if we did it service, we offered as definitive a biography as there can be on this rather mysterious figure. That's not to say that there aren't still some plot holes and some mysteries in his story. But we worked with what we had, and we tried to give this officer due credit and justice and be fair with his story.
And I think people can appreciate that. I mean, Henry's a perfect example. When it comes to World War II, people think, oh, so long ago, what's the harm? What's the damage? Henry could probably list off both hands of relatives of people who were around during the war. Some of them, that we know by name, of some who aren't, whose family members are around, and they would know. And I appreciate the fact, I'm sure Henry appreciates the fact that you guys said that you, A, didn't want to hero worship, but two, didn't want to paint him in the corner of going down the reputation that he may have gotten from the movies or the book of what he may or may have not done, and that you really wanted to bring all the evidence out because there are family members, there are people who that name is still associated with, and you don't want to do their family a disservice because you want to push some books. And so I think it's a great sign of your integrity and your honesty that, hey, let's look at the information we have and present him as a real person and not either a superhero or B, something else. And I think that is tremendous. And because perfect example, we all heard, not Sobel, Lieutenant Sobel, his family was a little, as respectfully so, a little maybe upset about the reputation that the miniseries portrayed it for their family. And so you wouldn't want to do the same disservice to Spears.
Right. And that was very much on our minds. And, when authors like us collaborate with family members, it's always a very delicate line to walk. It's a tightrope of sorts, because you don't want to sanitize or censor things that the family might find sensitive.
Yep.
But at the same time, you want to respect their wishes, because after all, they are providing you material. And so I'm happy to say that the various wings of Spears's family have offered us very good feedback, and they appreciate the book, and they've learned a lot. They've thanked us because they've said that it's offered a fuller picture for this man who was, even to them, somewhat of an enigma. And so that's some of the highest praise that we could have hoped for.
Well, absolutely, because we know most of these guys, they didn't come home and talk about their exploits because everybody was there. There's nothing to talk about. Everybody was there. And so, my grandfather, all I know from his time in the war is he worked grave registration in Europe. And that's all I know because he never talked about it. But so I'm sure they had a lot to learn by the research that you've done. Henry, I'm going to let you jump in and ask Jared some questions.
Yeah. So Jared, were you and Eric actually on Angus Wallace's World War II podcast?
Yes, that was about a year ago, and we were talking about our previous collaboration, and that was Dick Winters' letters, Hang Tough. So
I listened to that show. I discovered Angus's show, and then started working backwards and just catching up on all of them. And I remember listening to that episode. I enjoyed that a lot. But I totally appreciate what Don said it really well. I mean, I'm seeing this from different ways. I'm seeing it from the standpoint of I'm actually working on a book about my dad involving his unpublished writing, of which there's quite a lot that I found. So I'm seeing it from that standpoint. I'm seeing it from the standpoint of a guy who watched Band of Brothers a million times. And Don and Jeff and I have talked about that. We know every line in it. Spears was actually one of my favorite characters in the thing. So I'm looking forward to learning more about him. But, and then I'm hearing what you say from the standpoint of, a family member, because we take like what you did with Spears and his family giving you material. I mean, not to always bring this up, but we did that with HBO in the Pacific. I mean, they took my dad's story and blared it out to, in Technicolor, so to speak. So I can appreciate the sensitivity of wanting to approach that. Like, you've been given something very precious. And you have a lot of power in your hands to render something out of that, and you want to do it justice.
Yes, and I can certainly appreciate your thoughts, especially having working with Hollywood. And Hollywood is certainly a force to be reckoned with on the topic of historical memory. But some other areas of sensitivity that we had to navigate carefully through. One in particular that comes to mind is the story of the sergeant that Spears shot the day after D-Day. And in the miniseries and in the book, Band of Brothers alike, this is presented as hearsay to an extent. But one of the interviews that was provided to us by historian Mark Bando, and I'll also say that this book wouldn't have been possible without the research and assistance of Mark Bando. One of the interviews provided to us was from a 19-year-old paratrooper, a then 19-year-old paratrooper by the name of Art DiMarzio, who was a teenage kid from Ohio. He was really tall, hence the name Jumbo. And he was in Spears's platoon, jumped into D-Day with him, and he was witness to this killing that took place on D+1. And so one thing that we grappled with as authors, we had the name of the sergeant in question, and my co-author wanted to reveal his name, and we got into a rather spirited moral debate, an ideological debate on the pros and cons of all this, because on one hand, there is perhaps a degree of historical merit to discussing this. But on the other hand, as we dug a little bit deeper, I found out that the sergeant in question still has siblings alive today. Mm-hmm. And I thought, Eric, there's no way that we can, in good conscience, reveal his name because the sergeant is listed as killed in action on D-Day. To say that it was a cover-up may be going a little bit too far, but the paperwork was shuffled. The family members were told that he was killed on D-Day. And I, almost 80 years later, was not about to tell some brother or sister who has thought their entire lives that their brother died a hero, that he died in a state of drunkenness, in a state of belligerence, and his lieutenant killed him in an act of self-defense. And so those were the sorts of things that we had to grapple with. I don't think that concealing the name detracts from the story. The story's still there. The facts are still there. And it clarifies this one mystery about Spears. And to an extent, the series is slightly unfair to Spears because he's presented in the film as just, he's just this lieutenant who apparently has this bloodlust. Yeah. And killed this sergeant just because the sergeant was being insubordinate. It was an act of self-defense. This non-commissioned officer pulled a gun on his platoon leader. And one of the reasons why it was never formally cleared up is that Spears's company commander, Jer Gross, was killed the following day as the company was pushing toward Carentan. And so Spears never had the formal opportunity to clear his record. And that was another reason why it was essentially shoved under the rug to an extent. And so that was one of the other big issues that we debated. And I hope that we made the right decision in the long run. I feel better about it, how we handled it.
Can I jump in with a question?
Yeah, please,
Don?
go ahead.
So Jared, you chose to not reveal the name. How, if I may ask, because the book is just coming out or has just come out, is that correct?
It came out about a month ago.
Okay. So how, I'm not asking for any spoilers. Do you put a pseudonym? Do you just say an unnamed individual, or would you rather I not ask that question?
We refer to him just as the sergeant.
Okay. If I could say this, because I totally respect the way you handle that. When my dad wrote With the Old Breed, he grappled with some similar types of things. I mean, you go through something like that with a group of guys, you're going to see people at their best, you're going to see people at their worst. Mm-hmm. And I know my mother and I've had conversations about that. There were some guys who they didn't see the best of them. Mm-hmm. And my dad saw these things happen. And when he wrote about it in his book, he purposely chose to not use their real names. And I remember him telling my mom, these guys have family members. Mm-hmm. And so basically I'm just putting in a plug, and please take this in the proper spirit that I intended. If my dad were alive today, he would congratulate you for handling it that way.
Well, thank you. Those are high words that I really, really appreciate. And, it's worth mentioning too, your dad was not the only person who changed names in his memoirs and whatnot. One of my favorite memoirs of the war is If You Survive, by George Wilson, who was an officer in my grandfather's division, the 4th Infantry Division.
I have that, yeah.
And he changed a multitude of names.
Was he at Hurtgen Forest, Jared, or was he at Battle of the Bulge?
Yes.
Hurtgen, okay.
He arrived a few weeks after D-Day, fought through hedgerow country, was in the Hurtgen Forest, the Battle of the Bulge. And
was he in 28th Division?
The 4th Infantry Division.
4th Division, okay.
Yes.
All right.
And it's a very searing account of the war in Europe. And just like with the old breed, it doesn't sugarcoat too much, and it's a very realistic and honest depiction of men at war.
Well, another famous author for doing that, you'd be hard-pressed to find a real Christian name in A Helmet for My Pillow. Robert Leckie uses nothing but nicknames.
Yes.
Sergeant Spearman. And I was before Henry brought it up, I was going to say the same thing. Congratulations to you, because could you imagine you're the uncle or you're the granduncle of this sergeant, and you've been told, hey, he died a war hero, he died on D-Day, and then 80 some odd years later, or if you're a grandkid or great grandkid, not only do you find out he was killed because he was drunk and being belligerent, but he was killed by someone on our side. It would just completely devastate your visions of what your relative was, but could possibly sour your whole patriotic outlook on our country and our military at the time. If you found all of a sudden, not only did he not die, quote unquote, in a horrific manner because of bad action on his part, but he was killed by someone on his own team, that could definitely destroy you. So, and then I was going to bring up the fact that, Leckie, there's not a single real name in there. So I don't think anybody will have anybody with, at least of our age who thinks the things. Obviously a young person, who cares? No, as you get older and as you have family and you start to realize what life is really about, anybody who has a family or at least their heads on their shoulders wouldn't take any umbrage or, issue with the fact that you didn't name this person.
Well, thank you for those kind words. That makes me feel good, even more so about our decision. But one of the other things to take into account, we tried to offer context on these sorts of scenarios that we're playing out.
Yeah, because not to interrupt, but as far as that shooting goes, I think the book dedicated half a paragraph to it, and the series dedicated 3 lines. And so the fact that you're explaining it, I never knew it was self-defense. I just thought the guy was being belligerent and refused to get off his ass. And so I love the fact that you guys are taking on those things and providing context. That's what Spears really needs. He needs context to his character.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning, too, that this story about the sergeant reached a rather legendary status within the regiment before the division even got back to England, before the summer was out. Don Malarkey first heard about this incident with Spears when he was eating rations in a Normandy church, and he made a mental note to himself. He said, never get this guy as your platoon leader. It didn't quite work out for him like that in the long run.
Nope.
But that was one of the really fascinating things, is there were so many outlandish and conflicting stories about Spears that his men repeated, and it was like the fish, the fishing story. The fish got bigger and bigger. And to the extent that even after the war, these veterans started spreading rumors and stories that had no basis in fact. One story that emerged is that after the war, Spears had become a police officer for the Boston Police Department, and that he had been fired from his position because of cruelty that he showed to prisoners. And that is not true in the least. He was never a police officer, and accordingly, he was never fired. But Spears never tried to quiet any of these rumors or dispel them, because they worked in his favor as an officer. No one was going to challenge him if they thought that he was going to gun them down. Yeah. But in regard to recollection and historical memory, his fierceness did not serve him as well, because it led to rather sour memories on the parts of some of his men, some memories of which were unfounded and detached from reality. And so myth making can start very, very early, even before ink is put to paper.
Absolutely. And it's just, I don't know. And they kind of touch on that too in the series where he's, when he was asked about that, and he's like, essentially said, I'm not going to have any gold bricks under me. Everybody's going to do their best. So, why change it up? Is there any particular story or factoid that you came across that none of us knew prior to the research of this book that really stood out to you as far as his character goes?
There's a whole host of things that I could mention. We gained a lot of interesting background on his upbringing. A lot of people don't know that he was actually born in Edinburgh, Scotland. He was an immigrant, immigrated to the United States at age 4. We learned a lot about his adolescence in Boston. He was essentially in what we would today call a junior ROTC program at a high school in Boston. And that was his first interaction with the military. And his career progressed in a stepping stone fashion from there onward. We also learned a lot about his various marriages. He was married 4, perhaps 5 times.
Wow.
The information on his possible 5th marriage is a bit fuzzy. We didn't even mention it in the book because we didn't have enough information on it. But
now, were these
in short,
marriages?
When we think about the casualties of war, we think of physical wounds, we think about psychological wounds. But his domestic life became a casualty of war as well, because he was essentially married to the army. He was gone for 1 or 2 years at a time. He served in 3 foreign conflicts. He made 4 combat jumps by parachute into essentially hot landing zones. And all of this created a lot of upheaval on the home front for his various wives. And so I think that is a cost, an element of service to one's country that people need to think about more. What does it do to wives? What does it do to children? It's not merely affecting the combatants, but it's also affecting their loved ones at home. And so there's this whole sort of soap opera element to his story that we were able to flesh out to a bigger extent. And of course, one of the 2 of the most fascinating chapters are the 2 final ones in my mind, because they examine parts of his life that are completely neglected in other Band of Brothers themed books. And those concentrate on what he was doing during the Cold War, and then what was he doing in the final years of his life. And the final chapter was actually my favorite to write, because we were able to, and Henry may be able to relate to this to an extent, but he was trying to come to terms with this celebrity that he suddenly found himself in as a result of the book Band of Brothers and the subsequent mini-series.
Just so we can develop a timeline for our listeners trying to figure out what sort of celebrity he saw. What year did he pass?
I was going to ask that. Thank you, Don.
He passed away in 2007.
Okay, so he saw 6 years.
Okay.
He saw 6 years of it.
He was just a few weeks shy of his 87th birthday.
Wow.
And so he lived 6 years past the miniseries. And so he had to, confront this issue of, suddenly getting fan mail.
I was about to say his mailman's getting upset.
Autograph seekers coming to his home in Arizona. And so there were all of these conundrums that he had to confront.
And to confront that as a normal person, let's say in your 40s, is one thing. But to be at that advanced age and having your door being knocked on and some of the inconveniences that comes along with that notoriety at an advanced age got to be a lot harder to deal with than 30, 40, 50, 60s.
And indeed, this was a point of big difference between he and Dick Winters. Because Dick Winters, although a very humble man, he was a big cheerleader and a big promoter of Easy Company. And he wasn't doing it for any sort of mercenary reasons. He wanted to get the story of his men out there and into public consciousness. And of course, he succeeded in flying colors. Winters was a historian in his own right. He kept meticulous files on the men in his company, and even into his 80s. It was almost like he could still do roll call and still do, personnel reports and files on them. Spears was 180. He was completely opposite. And I think this is on the account that he was in the military 20 years longer than most of the men in Easy Company. He fought more wars. He saw more men die. When he retired in 1964, he thereafter burned his uniforms.
Wow.
He didn't want to relive anything that he had gone through. And so that's the big point of separation. Winters and Spears have a lot of commonalities in regard to leadership, especially in combat situations. But in regard to the bravado and the enthusiasm about cataloging their experiences, they're two very, very different men in that regard.
Obviously, this is pure speculation on our part, and it's the only thing you can really do at this point is to speculate. But you almost wonder if he kind of thought, because of his longevity in the military, if his band of brothers, quote unquote, notoriety kind of overshadowed the lives of other people that he served with who were lost in these other conflicts, as if their lives and their conflicts didn't matter as much as World War II. And I almost wonder if maybe there's a little bit of resentment there. Once again, it's purely speculation, but I could definitely see where someone who's put in that amount of service, fought in that many conflicts, and probably lost that many men, probably think, well, hey, what about these guys? What's so great about this particular thing and not this?
Yeah, and it's a very valid point. And on that note, it's worth mentioning that Spears only ever attended 2 reunions for Easy Company. The one was in 1947. It was right after the war. He hadn't fought in Korea yet. He hadn't been in all of these other military conflicts. And so there was less reticence on his part about going. And after that, nobody from Easy Company saw him again until 2001. Not even Dick Winters, despite the fact that they had a very vibrant written and telephone correspondence over the years. And we were told by one person that when Spears went to the 2001 reunion that was in France, whenever one of his fellow veterans would come up to him, he was losing his hearing by this point, he would yell out to them and say, "What war?" It's almost as if his subordinates from all of these conflicts kind of bled together in his memory. And he had trouble distinguishing who had served under him in what armed conflict. And so I think that's something that's very telling about his experiences.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because I only thing I know of Spears is what I know from the book and the miniseries. But he came to the Easy Company later in the war. Wasn't he a platoon leader in Dog Company during Breakwater Manor?
That's correct.
And so he didn't train with them in boot camp. He didn't have that history with them. He was basically brought in later, as we know, in outside of the Foy when Peacock did his
Dyke.
Dyke, yeah,
Dyke folded up.
Yeah. So he was from Dog Company, correct?
Yeah, and there's a very long and convoluted timeline that leads up to his ascendancy in Easy Company. When Spears trained with the 506 at Camp Toccoa, at that time he was in Charlie Company.
Okay. And
he remained in Charlie Company of the 506th until probably April or May of 1944. But he often butted heads with his battalion commander, Colonel Billy Turner. And the one story that we were told that the root of their disagreements is that Spears was a Yankee and that Turner was a kind of a Confederate-minded fellow from Georgia, and they had rather adverse leadership styles and outlooks. And Turner sought to be rid of Spears and booted him to Dog Company, which simultaneously put Spears in another battalion. And so it was this feud among officers on the eve of the Normandy invasion, no less, that ultimately sent Spears to Dog Company. And he served with Dog Company from June of 1944, or May or June of 1944, up until January of 1945, when he assumes command of Easy Company during the attack on Foy.
Now, forgive my nomenclature to TV shows such as Sons of Anarchy or The Mayans, but he almost had to feel like a nomad right before D-Day. He just getting shuffled from one group to the other right before this big jump, and you're going into this thing, and at this point, you got obviously you know some of the faces just through being in common environments, but to go into a situation like that, basically the new kid in school for all intents and purposes, he's got to be a little like, okay, here we go.
That's correct. Spears was very resentful of this sudden transfer,
sure,
because he had trained with Charlie Company. He was thrown into a platoon of strangers. He didn't know his men. They didn't know him. And it was hardly the sort of good team building exercise in the weeks building up to the biggest moment of their lives, which was the Normandy invasion. And so there was certainly no love lost between Turner and Spears. And unfortunately, Turner was also killed not too far away from Carentan in the days after the invasion commenced. And as one fellow officer made note of Spears, Spears saw Turner's body lying in the roadway. And Spears turned around and he said, "By God, the Germans have saved me a job," suggesting that he was planning on inflicting his own retribution on Turner for rotating him out of the company. And so that, too, is another vivid snapshot.
Well, here's another fun round of the speculation game. So he gets sent to Dog Company the night, 2 nights, maybe 3 days before D-Day. We know D-Day +1, we had the run-in with the quote-unquote sergeant. One could speculate or even argue that maybe if he had more time with these group of men, the quote-unquote sergeant maybe would have had some history, perhaps even some rapport, maybe more likely to have listened to him opposed to what did occur, because I'm sure that sergeant might, who are you? Who are you to tell me sort of issue? Whereas, once again, speculation game, if they had trained together and known each other for months on end, perhaps even a year or so, that whole situation could have had a completely different outcome.
I think that's a wise bit of speculation. I'd never taken that into account, but I think it's a very valid one because, by contrast, if you look at somebody like Dick Winters, he's known the men in his platoon for almost 2 years by that point. And so I think that's a very valid observation on your part.
Henry?
Yeah. So let me ask this question. I mean, we're the incident with the sergeant, Jared, that was on D+1.
Correct.
So I'm thinking back to Band of Brothers, and I rewatched it here a few months ago. But the thing that stands out in my mind is, the incident with the POWs, which through the entire series, we're thinking, okay, he really, supposedly shot one of his own guy, but, well, I guess that was the sergeant he was referring to in that line, but it's up till the very end when they're in the church, and, Spears, he kind of is like, look, didn't you ever know that Tursky wanted people to think he was the meanest stuff as blah, blah, blah. So the business with the POWs did not happen, right? I mean, that was all just a big rumor.
It did happen. And it happened on probably a bigger scale than what the series suggests.
Okay.
There's a few different ways that I could dissect this, but I'll start off with a newspaper article that Spears kept for the remainder of his life. Amongst his belongings that eventually found a home at the Gettysburg Museum of History was a clipping. And the headline to it, and I paraphrase here, but it said that Weymouth paratrooper, that's the Boston neighborhood that Spears lived in, Weymouth paratrooper responsible for the deaths of 13 Nazis on D-Day. And so Spears admitted to reporters. Interestingly enough, he subsequently was broadcast on a radio program, a popular radio program in the United States. So in the first 24 hours of D-Day, he killed over a dozen Germans. And probably 7 or 8 of those were the results of executions that he committed. Now, once again, it's important to offer context to these sorts of circumstances because Spears was not killing Nazis for the pure joy of killing Nazis. The first 3 that he and 2 other of his men executed were perhaps in the first minutes after they landed in Normandy. And the harsh reality of the moment is that paratroopers had nowhere to put prisoners.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
It was dark. There was confusion. Enemy was potentially around every corner. And Spears told his men, we can't take them with us. The prisoners would have slowed them down, possibly betrayed their position if they were to encounter more Germans along the way. And so it was a very harsh decision that he had to make. But ultimately, he determined that the survival of his platoon mates superseded the survival of prisoners that would otherwise be entrusted to his care. And it's also worth mentioning, too, that there was an order handed down from a rather informal divisional level by Division Commander Maxwell Taylor. And he very candidly instructed his paratroopers to take no prisoners until the paratroopers are relieved. And the fact that Germans were also committing atrocities on a widespread level just fueled the animosity even further. Sure. And the best way that I can phrase it is there were plenty of people on both sides that had cold blood on their hands on the night of D-Day. A few hours later, after Spears and his men grew their contingent and gathered up some more men from Dog Company near the Marmion farm, not too far from the coast, Spears and his men encountered another small handful of prisoners. And the Germans very well may have had the intention of surrendering, but Spears gunned them down before they had the opportunity to do so. Once again, and it may sound cold and harsh by our standards today, Spears had an objective. He had to move. He had to push his men onward, and he wasn't about to be slowed down by hauling prisoners back to the rear from where he just came. And so those are the stories about the prisoners. And likewise, it's worth mentioning that Spears was not exceptional in this regard. He was certainly not alone in these sorts of acts. And once again, taking that bit of context into account, I think, is really important in understanding the man in the moment.
Once again, the name of the book is Fierce Valor, the true story of Ronald Spears and his band of brothers. Now, we know with the Dick Winters book you wrote that due to your co-author, Eric Dorr, and his access to the museum, you guys had obviously the content and the stories in the book were fantastic, and I strongly recommend it. But one of the other nice things about that book is you guys had some very cool documents, photos, relics. Some may even say previously published photos. Did you have access to any sort of are we going to see some cool photos and some snippets of some handwritten letters and artifacts as we did with the other book?
Yes, that is correct. As is the case with Hang Tough, there's a very nice color template section in the middle of the book that shows some of Spears's artifacts, including a Luger and a Luftwaffe dagger that he brought home as war trophies, his various decorations and ribbons that he wore on his chest. He snipped those off of his uniform before he disposed of his uniform. There's a copy of summer 1945 letter that he wrote to Forrest Guth, which shows a surprisingly sweet and tender side, a sentimental side of Spears. And so we were able to show kind of the other dimensions of him. He just wasn't a hard-nosed, killer who was cold and calculative. He did have good relationships with many of his men, and it comes out in moments like that. But there are a lot of photos from the museum. Family members provided us some other ones. And I really think readers will enjoy some of the visualization that's provided in Fierce Valor accordingly.
Henry?
Did Spears have any children? I don't know if we've addressed that. I know he was married 5 times or 4.
Yes, he had at least one child, a son, who was born during the war.
Okay.
Spears's first wife was a British war bride who herself was in the British military.
Okay.
And the son is still alive today. And he himself subsequently served in the British military. But Spears may have had another child with one of his wives, but we weren't able to connect the dots fully enough to draw any firm conclusions. And so some things are best left unsaid if you're unsure,
Sure.
Right.
Factually speaking. And so it's possible that there's another child or two out there that we're unaware of. But he had some whirlwind marriages, and we tried to. There's a lot that could be speculated, but we tried not to do that in regard to his love life too much. We really tried to stick to the facts. But he did have a son.
When you spoke earlier about family members and the fame that came after Band of Brothers, it just kind of reminded me of some of the conversations I had with Adam Makos. Adam worked closely with me when the Pacific was being made, and we got to be really good friends. And we talked a lot about, Band of Brothers and Dick Winters, and Adam, of course, and his family got to be very close to Dick Winters. And I think one of the things I asked him, because again, I was kind of going through it from my own perspective with the HBO people. I was like, well, what's it like dealing with Dick Winters' family now that he's getting all this attention? And I remember Adam said they just want it to all go away. Dick could not be nicer. And as you said, Jared, a cheerleader for the guys and wanting to bring attention to him, but his family, they're just like, ugh,
It certainly, in my mind, it inflicted a toll on Dick. A lot of that celebrity. I think the pressure placed on him to be the public spokesperson for Easy Company really placed a lot of pressure on him in his final years. And he had to have his address unlisted in the phone book. He had to start getting his mail at a PO box. And so it's in the realm of possibility that celebrity took a few years off of his life.
Wow.
So the pressure of being put in the spotlight, it's understandable why Spears perhaps wanted to avoid that. Perhaps he had a sense of what was forthcoming.
And once again, that book is The Fierce Valor, the true story of Ronald Spears and his band of brothers. I assume people can get that on Amazon and at your website and anywhere else fine books are found?
Wherever fine books can be found. Yes, sir. Now,
before we let you go, a couple things. Down here in Florida, we're struggling ever since the pandemic has kind of lifted. At our living history events, some of the numbers have been down. How are things up there in PA where you're at now that things are opening up a little bit? I know there's been a few events, and I know you have actually an online event, which I want you to get a plug in for, coming up on June 24th. But how has things rebounded up there in your area when it comes to the public living history events?
Things are, fortunately for us, pretty much back to normal. For some reason, Pennsylvania seems to just be the mecca of living history, whether it be Civil War or World War II or something like that. But the Furious Fourth, my living history organization, We have 10 events scheduled for this year. As I said, it's largely back to normal.
Fantastic.
Back to pre-pandemic mode. And so we're just happy to be out there talking with people. Of course, and there's the added benefit is that everything's outdoors and fairly safe outdoors at this stage of the game. But we're just really happy to be back out there after a 3-year hiatus on the living history front. So, yeah, we're happy to be doing it.
Speaking of history, looks like 6:30 p.m. or 8 p.m. Friday, June 24th. You're doing an online living history seminar. Is that the WW World War II Altoona?
Yeah, well, that's a walking tour.
A walking tour.
It's
fantastic.
It's not online. It will be in person, and that's just a walking tour of my hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania, and and I think things like that are a good way of expanding the notion of living history, because practically every town in the United States has a World War II history.
Sure.
It's just a matter of doing the research and presenting it. And so I think there's really vivid and engaging ways that we as historians can present kind of the macro picture and the micro picture at the same time. Like, what was going on in your hometown during World War II?
And that's the best way.
How was this building being used as a plant? Or, how was this building being used as a recruitment center, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. I mean,
I think it's a really fun way to bridge the gap, placing local history within a global context.
Absolutely. It's more interesting for the participant to learn what happened here, opposed to, this happened over in Indiana, and I'm here. So it definitely makes it more relatable for the spectator. Let's talk about your YouTube channel, fella. Real History. How's that going? For those you don't know, he has a great YouTube channel where he sits down with historians and sometimes active personnel, and they go over military movies. I see you did. I'm so happy you did one on Glory. That is such a fantastic movie, and I almost think, not to living historians and all that, but that's almost one of those movies, and as far as just general population go, that kind of got lost to history. I mean, I don't know too many people who aren't into history that, I liked Glory. That's a good watch. I love that movie. That's one of those movies I cannot turn off even if I'm flipping through and it's 3/4 of the way done. I'm grabbing a soda and I'm there.
Most definitely. The channel we started a year ago, a good friend and I, and that was another pandemic project. And in essence, what it is that it's a history versus Hollywood channel. It's something that's grown in popularity on YouTube are these so-called reaction videos where people
I've seen those. Yeah.
Sit down and watch something for the first time, and they have their mouths wide open, shocked about something that they've seen or they've reacted to. And so we took that concept and refined it a little bit. And rather than just reacting to a movie, I try to offer historical commentary to what people are seeing. How does fact and fiction differentiate here? And so it's a lot of fun. I love talking about historical films. Even the worst of historical films have a bigger outreach than the most successful and the most popular of history books. That's just a sad reality.
So what you're saying, your episode on Wind Talkers got a bunch of views then?
We haven't done Wind Talkers yet, but I'm looking forward to scorching that one. But and I think one reason why the channel has found an audience is because everyone watches movies. Everyone has seen a lot of these films, and it's a really good foundation for getting into these deeper conversations about the past.
Sure.
And hopefully, if I do something right on it, people will go and pick up a book that I suggest at the end of each episode, if that's the case.
That's kind of how I feel about living history. It's like, after my weekend's done, even if it's only one person, if I can get one person when they get home, whether they're flipping through the TV and something World War II related's on and they stop, even if it's for a minute and a half, whereas the day before they would have just kept on going, or if they're walking through a bookstore and they see a World War II themed book and they actually stop and pick it up, even if they don't buy it, even if they just, even if the seed is just planted, whereas 3 days prior to them coming to that event, they wouldn't have put any second thought into it, to me, that's a win.
Absolutely. And whether it's a movie or a local history tour or a field trip, it only takes one spark to ignite that passion or that interest. And so I'm out there trying to light fires as often as I can through as many means and modes as I can. And hopefully it catches on for a few people.
It's now that time of the episode, Henry. What you reading?
I just started volume 2 of Ian Toll's Pacific War trilogy, Pacific Crucible, or no, Conquering Tide. Pacific Crucible was the first one. So Conquering Tide. I just started that. I'm about 40 pages in. Really enjoying that.
And Jared, what you reading?
I am reading a book that was published by Turner Classic Movies called Hollywood Victory. And it is a history of Hollywood during World War II, how movie stars and moguls were doing their part to contribute to the war effort. And it's been a fascinating read. If you're interested in 1940s culture or classic cinema, I would really, really recommend it. I've learned a lot of great new stuff.
That's funny. I got up a second time because that reminded me of a book someone got me for Christmas a while back. It's the cartoons of World War II, and it's literally an entire cover to cover of just
have that book.
Propaganda posters and cartoons. It's definitely an interesting read. The book I'm reading, I just got into because, as we all know, I finally finished up The Lonely Vigil about the Coast Watchers of the Solomons, which, Jared, if you have not read that book, I strongly suggest. It came out in like 1977. It's got a horrible watercolor painting cover on it. Ignore that. It's a fantastic book. But I'm going down the, no pun intended, the submarine aisle. The book's in the other room. I'm currently reading The Fatal Dive, Solving the World War II Mystery of the USS Grunion. And it's actually written by the author and supplied by information from his kids who actually went out despite everyone's telling them that it would be impossible to find this submarine because of where it was located, or where they believed it was located off the coast of Alaska, that it was just too deep, too far gone, no one wanted anything to do with it. And learning the history of their father and the men who served on that submarine, and just the history of that submarine in general, is pretty darn interesting. I'm into the first chapter, which is why I don't have a whole lot of information to lay out on you guys, but I'll provide some on the upcoming episodes. Jared, anything you want to plug other than what we've already covered, or you can plug that again?
I just want to say this is the first time I've had the opportunity to converse in person, so to speak, with Henry, and it's a real honor because I've long time been a student of your family history and the experiences of your dad, and I hope we'll get to chat further about history and hopefully sometime in person as things progress. But it's been really, really nice talking with you, sir, for the first time here tonight.
Wow. Thank you, Jared. I very much appreciate that, and I'm looking forward to reading the Spears book very much.
Go on
and
order here
I
shortly.
Thoroughly enjoyed talking to you too.
Jared,
thank you.
Gotta ask, what's? I'm sure you got something already, like in pre-written, maybe your storyboarding or whatever the author equivalent of storyboard is. What's the obviously you don't want to give it away, but what's the theme or the storyline of your next book? I know you got something. You're not just putting the old keyboard away.
Yeah, I don't let the grass grow too thick or anything like that. I'm essentially working on two things right now. One of which is my dissertation,
okay.
Which I may have mentioned on a previous episode, but I'm examining in that the World War II history of the Gettysburg battlefield.
Okay.
And that may sound like an oxymoron, but like many of our national parks, Gettysburg mobilized during World War II. There were top secret psychological operations units that were training in the park. There were German prisoners of war that called the fields of Pickett's Charge home for 2 years. And of course, Gettysburg took on a rather sublime national symbolism during the war years as well, especially in the context of the Gettysburg Address. Another one that I'm in the very, very initial phases of, I'm in conversation with a World War II veteran of the 8th Air Force as we speak, about potentially co-writing his memoirs with him. And so that one is in its very, very earliest phases.
Well, definitely,
it has a lot of potential. And I think there's a really great story to be told in it.
If that comes to fruition, we'll definitely have to have you back on, because Jeff, who's not here tonight, he is all things 8th Air Force. That's his like focus right now. But
well, and Jared, that's a great thing, man, with Masters of the Air coming up.
Yeah, I think there'll be a lot of public interest in it. And I think putting a human face to some of these stories, I think it'll be very timely. And this veteran is really excited about it. He really wants to get his story out there. And so it has a lot of good prospects, I think.
Not to put in a shameless plug, but while we're on the topic, one of the things we used to do here, and Jared can attest to this, it's getting harder and harder and harder to find veterans who are still able to tell their story. So if you guys have any veterans that you know of, or maybe a family member knows of, that wants to tell their story or has the ability to do so, whether it's via a phone call on the old-fashioned landline or Zoom, send us an email to mailcall@WTSPWWII.com. And who knows, maybe if they're in Jared's location, we can send him out there in person and he can talk to them as well. But yeah, please send us an email, mailcall@WTSPWWII.com. I was going to let you go, Jared, but I thought I'd be doing our friend Henry a huge disservice, because as he kind of touched on, he's working on some stuff. And Henry, I want to give you the opportunity to talk to a multiple published author about maybe things he can advise you on about the writing world and getting stuff published.
Well, yeah. So Jared, I've got an article that's about to be published in World War II magazine. It's going to be in the autumn issue, which for me, that's a huge honor. I mean, I'm not like you. How many books have you written?
I've written or co-written 9 books.
Yeah. So that's amazing. So, I have the day job where I go sit in a cubicle and do something completely unrelated, but yeah, I've got an article coming out in World War II magazine. It'll be, and Don, that was the only thing I was going to plug, was just say I found out it will be in the autumn issue. But since you kind of segued that, Don, so Jared, what I'm trying to do is, my dad's book was published at 312 pages. The original manuscript for that book was over 820 typed pages.
Oh, wow.
It was under lock and key at the archives at Auburn University here in Alabama, where my dad's papers are stored. And a lot of people through the years have wanted to get access to it. We, as in my brother, my mother, myself, we have demurred on that. And I have, back in October, I got a copy of the unedited, uncut manuscript from the archivist. They were very, very kind and very cooperative and willing to help me. And that came about as a result of a conversation with my mom. And she said, look, there's a lot of material in that manuscript that got cut from your dad's book. I wish you would do something with that and try to do it while my mom's 95. And she said, I wish you could do that while I'm still around to see it. So I'm like, okay, Mom, I got it.
Well, who would better know than your mom? Because a lot of people don't realize this. She's the one who wrote it all down when your dad was dictating it to her and going over the notes.
Yeah, she typed the first half of the manuscript, Jared. And then my dad's secretary at the University of Montevallo typed the Okinawa part. But and I mean, look, you're the guest. I didn't want to turn this into discussing all that. But
no, not at all. I'm more than happy to. I'm honored to be included on such a conversation. Have you read the entirety of it?
Yeah. So I've developed a game plan. I got the manuscript. They sent it to me via PDF. I printed it out. I got Kinko's. I took it on a thumb drive, got them to print it back in November. It came out it was 4 separate PDFs, each one about 200 pages long. And so what I did was I got Kinko's, when they printed it, I got them to print it out in these coil bound books. So I've got 4 of these, and you're looking at one of the pages of it. This is like the second day on Peleliu. Where I highlighted in yellow is stuff that didn't get published.
Oh, wow.
I went through and I made notes in the margins after I highlighted every bit of this, and I wore out about 4 highlighters
Only?
of what didn't get published.
Wow.
And then I went back and I made notes in the margins. And then when I got done with all that, back in around like March, April, I started sitting down, I started getting some ideas, and I started writing. And I've written about 90 pages, a lot of which is bringing over the unpublished stuff, but then I'm weaving it in with my memories of talking to my dad. You know, I've got, as you can see, I've got a lot of his artifacts here on the wall.
I do.
And so he and I were very close, and we talked a lot. So I have a lot of memories of things we talked about. I mean, a lot of the stories that guys like Don and you have read through the years in his book, and China Marine too, if you read that.
Fantastic book.
You know, I heard those stories growing up.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm doing, man. I've got some, like John McManus is really in my corner. He's really excited. And I've reached out to a gentleman named John Hoffman, who's a retired Marine colonel, who's written some fine Marine history and Army stuff too. But they're really excited by what they've seen. That's not to say that I mean, look, man, this is early stages.
Yeah.
You know, I'm 25% through the original manuscript. I was doing some writing today, and I'm on about page 216, 217 of the original manuscript. So that ought to give you some idea of how far I have to go. I'm grateful that I have a day job, and I'm thankful for it. But man, if I could work on this 5 days a week, it would get done so much quicker.
Yeah.
And I could spend more time talking to guys like you who could say, okay, here's some advice, you know.
Well,
so
Yeah. Well, ideas are just rolling through my head like marbles at the moment. But I would love to further that conversation with you, and perhaps Don would be kind enough to share your email address with me.
please. Yeah.
And that would be perhaps the best way that I could offer my input. But broadly speaking, I would say the best advice I can give is keep at it.
Okay.
Because, a lot of people start writing books and a lot fewer of them finish them. And so the best thing that I can say is keep at it. You have the story, you have the personal connection. There's a degree of celebrity, rightfully so, to your father's story. There is an audience out there. So the best thing that I can say is just keep on it. Do it for him. Do it for your mom. Do it for your family. Do it for all of us who are interested. And that's the best wisdom I can impart in this final moment of the show.
I think those are the perfect words, and we are going to do you guys a disservice and continue this off the air. But for those of you listening, please head over to WTSPWWII.com, and you can see all the links to Jared's book and his other books, as we always include in each episode, as well as links we're going to put up for Henry's appearances on World War II TV, etc. And for myself, Jared, Henry, and Jeff, who is not here, we will talk to you all next week. Thank you guys so much for hanging out. And as always, you can also do us the favor by heading over to patreon.com, look up Digital 410, or go to WTSPWorldWar2.com, click on the Patreon link, like and subscribe, and we will talk to you all next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.